We have all heard of the myths and the legends of our history. But is there another story? I was educated as a strict Catholic, and I was educated in a boarding school for 6 years, led by Jesuits. I knew the Bible. We translated parts of the Bible from Greek to Latin and from Latin to German. So I really know what I'm talking about. And while making these translations, as a boy, I realized that the God of the Bible cannot be a real God. I mean, something which is a real God is a question of definition. God, for me, has to have some qualities. For example, God makes no mistakes. God would not need a vehicle in which to move around from point A to point B. God is all over. Of course, God makes no mistakes. He knows what he's talking about. Now in the Bible, we found a God. He made some mistakes. He made some errors. He even admitted errors, etc. He uses a vehicle to move from point A to point B. The result was I had simply doubts in my own Christian education. And I wanted to know if other communities in antiquity have similar stories than we have. That's why it all started with Chariots of the Gods. Now, in beginning the Bible, the second book of Moses, the Lord, before he descends from heaven to earth, he gives order to Moses. Moses should create a gate around the holy mountain so that the people would not come close by. Otherwise, the people would be destroyed. So Moses constructs a gate around the mountain. The Israelites are on a safe distance. And then the Lord descends with smoke, fire, trembling, loud noise. In the Bible it says, and the mountain looked like an oven, like a fire. So my God is a spiritual being. My God does not need a vehicle in which to move around, come down, smoke, fire, loud noise, trembling, etc. So that's why in the Bible we find many descriptions about extraterrestrials. We simply translated it wrong. Some unknown thousands of years ago, a group of extraterrestrials arrived here. And that was not coincidence. Because again, long before, millions of years ago, they created life simply by infecting a certain region of their Milky Way with DNA. They knew exactly that only on planets which are similar than the one they came, some life would be evolved. So they knew in advance that they will come to Earth and they will find forms of life. And one of these forms of life was our ancestor. Let's call him, in a non-scientific way, an ape. They simply took one example of it, took one simple cell and changed the DNA in the cell. This cell grows, multiplies, and then they put it into the womb of a female of the same species. This female, after a certain amount of months, will give birth to a child. The child has definitely the evolution of the parents. I mean the skeletons, the bones, the mouth and all thing. But because of this artificial mutation, the child now grows out of evolution. All our family members, still today, the apes, the chimpanzees, the gorillas, whatever, we are all the same family tree. They are still stupid. If they learn something, they learn it from us. The chimpanzees who can't speak, we tell them so. But they are still stupid. Only one species, Homo sapiens sapiens, out of the same family tree has become intelligent, learned the language because of an artificial mutation made from the same family tree. Now, as soon as you want to have a new population, you need at least two, female and male. And then you end in the story of Adam and Eve. And the gods created humans according to their own image. We are the offsprings of them. That's why they understand us today. They could have destroyed us and killed us throughout thousands of years, anytime, but they were never doing it. We belong to the same family. So Adam and Eve were a creation by an artificial mutation made out of the family tree of our primitive ancestors. This does not contradict evolution, by the way. Of course we have evolution until the chimpanzee, and they still exist. But because of the artificial mutation, Adam and Eve, we are the Homo sapiens sapiens. Before the gods, the so-called gods, left our planet, in the Bible, the paradise, they told them, you humans, you can do everything, whatever you like. Rule over the planet, rule over the plants and over the trees, rule about everything, except one thing you're never allowed to do. Have sex with your own family, but the ones which are not mutated, because only two, Adam and Eve, and their sons and daughters later, they can cross together. Soon as one of them would have a sexual intercourse with their own family, apes, the figure of the chromosomes at that time are still the same. They would create some monster. In the Bible, they say some giants. That was the reason for the great flood. Not only according to the Bible, according to the book of Enoch. They clearly say to Enoch, we will bring now a flood to destroy all these giants and mixed creatures which exist in the meantime on the planet Earth. So according to this, the flood was not a coincidence, the gods created it. Imagine a normal ship on the ocean, 200 years ago. So they are maybe for weeks on the ship, on board the ship. Now they came to an island with beautiful girls. What do? They have sex. The same thing happened with the extraterrestrials. They were for maybe hundreds of years in their spaceships. They were working in their spaceship, the astronauts. Now they came to the planet Earth. And as the Bible says, they saw that the daughters of men were beauty, so they took them to wife. By the way, in sort of the Bible translation, they say, the fallen angels saw that the daughters of men were beauty, and they took them to wife. What is a fallen angel? They who descended. And not only in the Bible, you find this absolutely clear again in the book of Enoch. They clearly say the guardians of the sky, they had a mutiny on board. Some of them wanted to have sex with beautiful humans. They wanted to have contact, sexual contact with them. But it was forbidden to do so. That's written in the book of Enoch. So they make a mutiny. Enoch gives even the names of 36 of these extraterrestrial figures, which say, we want to go down there, we want to have sex, we want to do this, even if it's against what the Lord is the commander of the spaceship, says. And they had sex, and the result was some different creatures and giants and all these things. In the story of Moses, together with his brother Aaron, goes to the holy mountain, and the Lord gives him precise measurements for the arch. He says, you must construct this object so long, so large, so high, etc. You must use this sort of metal. And then he even says to Moses, and make it exactly like the original you see here. So there was an original, and Moses made the first copy. Later, Moses came back from the holy mountain to his people, and the people were hungry, and they could find nothing to eat. Now in the Bible it says that the Ark of the Covenant was connected together with the strange beings, maybe a machinery, which is called the oldest of the day. This you do not find in the Bible, you find it in the Kabbalah. And then this oldest of the day produced manna. That means the manna machine, it was a machine who produced manna. Manna was just a ground nutrition. With manna you mixed all kinds of things. That needed energy. The energy comes from the Ark of the Covenant. You see, the Ark of the Covenant was an absolute dangerous object. And the Ark of the Covenant definitely had radioactivity. In the second book of the Kings, the Ark of the Covenant is transported. And one of the priests, his name is Uzzah. He simply, because there was a moment where the Ark looked as if she would fall from the wagon. One of the priests, his name was Uzzah, he touched the Ark. And at the same second he died, like from an electricity power. And in the book of Samuel it says, everyone who came too close to the Ark of the Covenant died. And they describe how they died. That their skin became pale, their nails on fingers and feet fell out, they were blind, etc. So they were afraid of the Ark of the Covenant, and freely, by free will, they brought it back to Israel. The Israelites the next morning saw that the Ark of the Covenant were here again, with 4 horses. The horses were already near dead. The children of Israel were dancing around the Ark of the Covenant, praying to the Lord that the Ark of the Covenant is back finally from the land of the enemy. And at that morning, so says the Bible, 72 of the Israelites died, including children. What have these children done wrong? The only thing, they were too close to the Ark of the Covenant, because the Ark of the Covenant was absolutely dangerous. You know, Aaron was the priest, the brother of Moses, and Aaron was the one who created a new priesthood. Only those ones are allowed to go close to the Ark of the Covenant. They had to wear separate suits, 7 times woven, separate clothes. The Ark of the Covenant was dangerous because it was in reality a plutonium reactor. Plutonium reactors are used today in our satellites. If you need a satellite who needs power for 20 or 40 years, you need a miniature plutonium reactor. Plutonium reactors are never used on Earth because they are incredibly dangerous. Plutonium is really dangerous. Just a little piece, a powder of plutonium can kill thousands of people. It's a very, very high radioactivity. That's why we use it only in satellites, and they never tell it to the humans that in these satellites the energy came from plutonium reactors. So, finally, the Ark of the Covenant was back with the Israelites. 72 of them died. They continued their trip, and Solomon created the first temple. Solomon put the Ark of the Covenant in a temple, in a holy place. Then Solomon, by the way, he had some flying machines. Solomon could fly all the time. This flying machines of Solomon is not part of the Bible, it's part of the so-called Chebar Negest. The Chebar Negest is the book of the kings of Ethiopia. There you read about the flying machines of King Solomon. They even say how fast it was. So in one day, he made the distance of 30 days if you would go on the ground. Anyhow, Solomon created a temple and had a separate room for the Ark of the Covenant. Now Solomon, because he can fly, he had a girlfriend, the Queen of Chebar, in today's Ethiopia. He visited her different times, and they had a boy together. He went to visit his father Solomon. So he comes from today's Ethiopia with the caravan, with many camels, and came to Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, Bainalechem said to his father Solomon, my mother, the Queen of Chebar, which you love so sehr, has some problems for enemy. And she asked me to come to Jerusalem that I should bring the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia, to the Queen of Chebar. Because the people who have the Ark of the Covenant, they always have power, she said. Now Solomon said to his son, this is impossible. My own people, my priest, would kill me if I would allow you to take the Ark of the Covenant out of the temple of Jerusalem. But the boy was finally the son of Solomon, He was a priest himself. So at night, he went with the few followers into the temple, into the room where the Ark of the Covenant was standing. He made an exact copy of it. They went out again. And outside the walls of Jerusalem, his artists created a copy of the Ark of the Covenant. At night, they made the priest of Solomon drunken. They went into the temple. They stole the original Ark of the Covenant, and they put the copy there. The next morning, the priest didn't even realize it. It took 2 or 3 days before they realized that not the original is anymore in the temple of Jerusalem. It is a copy. Now Solomon, he knew exactly it was my son. And he went with his horses to follow, but he could never reach him because Beinallechem, with the Ark of the Covenant, again was flying in one of these flying machines to today's Ethiopia. So the original of the Ark of the Covenant arrived, in fact, at today's Ethiopia. The queen of Chebar, she was very, very happy. Thousands of people surrounded the Ark of the Covenant, and thousands of people died. Again, with the same sickness as we had before in the second book of the Kings. Now the queen of Chebar was afraid of the Ark of the Covenant. She realized that this object is dangerous. She put it down in a hole in the ground. And exactly there, today, in the Ethiopian city of Aksum, the cathedral of the Holy Virgin Mary is standing. Now this is Coptical Christianity in Ethiopia. And a few years ago, the head of the Coptical church was in Switzerland shortly and in Germany. And one journalist asked him, do you know about the Ark of the Covenant? Is it true that this is in Ethiopia under the church of the Holy Virgin Mary? And the chief said, yes, I was one of them who saw the Ark of the Covenant. This object is not from this planet. This object is from another planet. So sometimes I'm asked by the critics, where are the proofs for extraterrestrials? The Ark of the Covenant, even if only a piece of it has survived, would be a final proof. But that's a question of religion. The religions would never allow us to go down there and to make scientific researches on this object. So the time is not ripe for it. We have to change again the spirit of time. You see, my God, in my opinion, in my dreams, does not need a vehicle in which to move around. God is omnipresent. God is like a spirit. He's always there. Now in the Bible, the prophet Ezekiel describes a strange story. He says, when I was captured among the captives at the river of Chebar. You have to understand, at that time, Jerusalem was overtaken by the Babylonians. The Babylonians ruled over Jerusalem, and the high society of Jerusalem went as captured slaves to Babylonia. There they have to work for the Babylonians. Ezekiel, by profession, was a high priest at the temple, so he was among the high society. He had to work there. Now, when these slaves are working, and Ezekiel writes all this in the first person, that means the I form, I did, I saw, I realized, not a story in the third person, I saw. Ezekiel writes that of a sudden they hear the noise in the sky. All the slaves look up there. Then he sees an object coming down from the sky. Then he realizes that the object makes a tremendous noise. He compares the noise with the thundering of a waterfall. Or he compares it with fighting wagons. So a terrible noise this object made. All the slaves looking there, the object comes down, sand is blown up. Ezekiel is high priest by profession, so he believes in the beginning it must be God. He felt on his nose to pray to the Lord. And then he realized this is not God. And then he describes exactly what he sees. He describes not only the noise, he describes the wings. The wings moved. When the wings moved, that the tremendous noise started to be there again. When the wings stood still, they were hanging down. He describes the leg. He clearly says the leg were out of metal. Then he cries the wheel. And the wheel shocked him totally, because the wheel of his times can go forward and backward. But the wheel which he sees here, they go also forward and backward, but at the same time, left and right, without making a steering movement. You see, when you are sitting in your car today, and you want to make a curve, you make on your wheel a curve, a steering movement, and the wheels are turning now that you come in your curve. Ezekiel sees a wheel which goes forward, backward, right and left without making a steering movement. This shocks him so he cannot understand it. He describes it 4 times. Some 30 years ago, I had a secret speech at the headquarters at NASA in Huntsville, in the United States. Secret, why secret? Because both parties agreed not to go to public. I did not say a word at that time, and the other part not. And on this speak, I also talk about 5 minutes about Ezekiel. And after the speech, we had a dinner together, and there was the chief of the Department of Construction, an ex-German, his name was Joseph Brumrich, who came to me and said, that was very interesting, but Mr. von Däniken, in the Bible, you will never find technology. The Bible, this is imagination. These are dreamings. These are wishes. These are visions, but not technology. Anyhow, he said, I was the first one who brought him up to Ezekiel. He never read Ezekiel before. Now he will do it. He started to read Ezekiel, and finally he realized that whatever Ezekiel described is real. They have it on their design desk today. And he started to reconstruct Ezekiel's description. The outcome was a book with the English title, The Spaceship of Ezekiel. And in the foreword of it, Mr. Joe Blumrich, the ex-chief of the construction department at NASA, said, I absolutely started this work to disprove Erich von Däniken's story of Ezekiel. But it was absolutely sensational what comes out. Ezekiel did saw an extraterrestrial spacecraft. Now, Ezekiel's spaceship is not a mother spaceship with which you can move from star to star. Ezekiel's spaceship is only an object which today we would call space shuttle. You have to have a mother spaceship, and from the mother spaceship, a smaller vehicle comes down to the Earth. So that's what it was. Now, Ezekiel describes, I think it's up to chapter 40 or so, that the splendorness of God. Yes, by the way, I have to add, this is very important. I knew the original Ezekiel. I read it first in Hebrew. I did not learn specially Hebrew, but we had a Latin translation. And in the original Ezekiel, the word God never appears, never. Ezekiel says it was the splendorness of the highest. The word God in the Bible only comes in later by the translators. The translator, the splendor of the highest, he means God. In the original, the word God is never mentioned. So, in theology, they say, well, Ezekiel had a vision. He saw God sitting on his flying chariot. As I said before, for me, God does not need a flying chariot. Now, anyhow, he continues in the book of Ezekiel and he says that the splendorness of the highest arrived a second time. And this time, the hand of the highest put him on the throne. In my view, he was sitting in the co-pilot's chair. And then he describes how they started. He says, and the hand of the highest pressed upon my chest, because he feels the gravity when starting. He does not know where the trip goes, because he says, they brought me on a very, very high mountain. He clearly says, very, very, not just very high mountain, no high mountain, very, very high mountain. He doesn't know where he is. He looks down and he sees under him something like a city, a small city or a big village. And in the center of it, something like a temple. Now the word temple again, we had to analyze. What was a temple for our forefathers? A temple was a place where the gods were living. Later, we made temples, churches, in believing that now God will come into there, but in the original time. So, he saw something like a temple in this big village or small city. He is sitting himself in the splendorness of the God on the co-pilot seat. the splendorness of the Lord comes to a standstill over the temple. Slowly, slowly, he sinks inside the so-called temple. And Ezekiel realized at that moment that the noise of the wings were this time higher and louder than what he had heard before in the desert, because now the echo comes back from the walls of the so-called temple. Then it comes to a standstill. Ezekiel gets out of the space shuttle, and of a sudden a glittering being appears again, one of the strangers, and he says to Ezekiel, "Oh humans, you have eyes to see, but you see nothing, and you have ears to hear, but you hear nothing." And then the man in glittering suit gives Ezekiel a measuring device and orders him to measure this whole building, the so-called temple. Ezekiel, in the meantime, he understands that this has nothing to do with God. So he has courage. He asks back to the glittering man, "Why? Why should I measure this temple?" And the other one says, "That's the reason why we brought you here, humans." So Ezekiel starts to measure length and wide and how many stairs, etc. All this you can read in the Bible, all the measurements of the so-called temple. Now in Germany, we had a German engineer, his name is Hans Herbert Bayer. And he read these measurements and he asked himself, is this a true building or is it just imagination, fantasy? Because the theologians say this temple, this building is a future temple in a future Jerusalem. But the German engineer wanted to know, is this a real object? And he started to calculate exactly according to Ezekiel's measurement. And out comes a building which looks today like a stadium, like a football stadium. And then this German engineer came to me and I saw his calculations, absolutely precise. I asked him, have you ever heard of NASA, of Mr. Blumrich's reconstruction? Because NASA did only reconstruct the splendorness of the highest, which means the shuttle, while the German engineer was only reconstructing the so-called temple. So one have the splendorness of the highest and the temple. So I brought the two men together, the German engineer and the NASA engineer. And the space shuttle fit perfectly into the temple by every centimeter. The so-called temple was nothing else but the base station for the extraterrestrial shuttle. They had to come to a standstill, they had to repair it, they have to do something. And we have definitely a proof of all this. And here, at least for me, something is very, very important. You see, when you read the Bible, just as a normal people, you read, and the temple will be so and so long, the temple will be so and so large, will be so and so high, etc. Will be means future. But the original Ezekiel has nothing written in the future. I know the original, I translated it myself. In the original he says, the building is so and so long, is so and so large, etc. How can this future, this form and grammatic of the future? The theologians believe that Ezekiel had a vision of the Almighty God. And the Lord now shows him a future temple in the future Jerusalem. Now the Semitic language, the original Semitic language, has no vocals, has no A, E, O, U, has only consonants. And you simply put these vocals in it. Now, because they believe that Ezekiel is talking about a future temple in the future Jerusalem, they have translated the Ezekiel in the form of the future. The temple will be so and so long, will be so and so long. In reality, it's all present. The temple is so and so long, is also. The temple was nothing than the landing base for the extraterrestrial shuttle. Imagine there is a group of humans working as slaves for the Babylonian on a river with the name of Chebar. A group of extraterrestrials is watching them, learn their language. The group of extraterrestrials came down. They know in the meantime which human is the leader of this group. It was Ezekiel by profession. He was a high priest in the temple. They took him and brought him on a very high mountain in a far country, very high mountain far away. They give him the order to measure the building, and then they bring him back to his own people. Now his people will ask, hey, Ezekiel, you are back again? Wonderful, we were afraid of you. What have they done to you? Have you been hungry, thirsty? And Ezekiel is very, very happy. He describes his first flight, and he describes he had to measure a building. He says, here are the measuring dates. Here. Why should extraterrestrials do things like this? They knew exactly. Ezekiel and his society believe that it has to do with the real Almighty God. And because Ezekiel had the chance to be taken away by the real Almighty God, such a description will not just be thrown away. Such a description becomes holy. Such a description will enter into the holy books of mankind. The extraterrestrials know that, of course, humans will have wars throughout the history. They will fight against each other, but the holy texts will remain because they are translated in many, many languages. They knew this. They knew again, in the far future, the human race will have the capability to fly themselves. They will read this old text of Ezekiel, and they will say, come on, this is not God. This is technology. And again, we have the temple. We can reconstruct these things because of the measuring days of Ezekiel. They will come to the conclusion, the one conclusion which I said here. It was not God. It was simply the space shuttle of the extraterrestrials. All what we have to do now, or our science had to do now, is find the temple where Ezekiel was. He was on a very, very high mountain. And I have a possibility of such a temple. In South America, in Peru, 3,800 meters in the Andes, is a temple which archaeology does not understand. The temple is called Chavín de Huántar. Chavín de Huántar has no starting point. It was promptly here. We have no idea of the culture of Chavín de Huántar, because every culture has a development. A culture is not just here. It starts slowly, but the temple of Chavín de Huántar does not fit into the development of a culture. Also, on the walls of the temple of Chavín de Huántar, you found strange heads who look absolutely strange. Some of them have helmets on. And then you find some engravings of winged beings. In archaeology, they call it winged geniuses. Winged beings, done so precisely. Ezekiel describes when he was brought on this very, very high mountain. He said, they come down to the so-called temple. The temple was nothing but the base camp of the extraterrestrials. And he saw on the wall, I saw some heads and figures and some winged creatures on the wall. And in Chavín de Huántar, we find these winged creatures. And archaeology does not know who started Chavín de Huántar. Simply not because he was the extraterrestrial in that case. They needed on Earth a base camp. You see, when our scientists, our mountain climbers, they go to the Himalaya, you don't make it in just one line. You need base camps, stop by stop. So extraterrestrials needed something like this too. And one of these base camps was Chavín de Huántar. And Ezekiel was brought up there, and he writes about it. Today we find the temple. We see these winged creatures, etc. It all makes perfect sense. I'm Erich von Däniken. Join me next time on Beyond the Legends.